Good morning, everyone. The hour of 9 o'clock having arrived. I want to call this meeting and thank everybody attending the RTA Board of Directors this morning. I want to review a couple of guidelines for our meeting, of which all the members, I think, are pretty used to. If you're here in person, number one, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here with great attendance. As always, please turn your microphones on when you wish to speak and off when you are finished, so that we only have one microphone on at a time. And I will call on those in person with questions or comments for those who are here. For those calling in remotely, and there's a couple of you today, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise as we do record these meetings. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand, and the board secretary will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, try, if you can, to remember to lower your hand and unmute before you begin speaking. With that said, I now will call officially the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order, and let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah. We're going to have an appropriation for a new state flag sometime next to the American flag, as the voting is open for the new state flag. Just as a note, when Director Koterick and I were at the Red Line extension ceremony on Friday, they did begin with the Pledge of Allegiance at that press conference, which was nice. All right, Madam Secretary, will you? Yeah, and John, you were there. Absolutely. Why don't you run over to your old haunts over there and grab us one? All right, thank you, everyone. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Carey. Here. Dr. Colson. Here. Dr. Gathing. Here. Dr. Gorman. Here. Dr. Groven.
Here.
Dr. Jenkins.
Here.
Dr. Koterick.
Here.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes.
Dr. Mondero. He's online. I think he's on mute. Oh.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pang. Dr. Rotondo. Dr. Ross.
Here.
Dr. Ryan.
Here.
Dr. Sager.
Here.
Dr. Yonan.
Here.
And Chairman Dillard.
Present.
We have 11 present, 3 remote, and 2 absent.
Great. Now that we've established we have a physical quorum, our board secretary has received completed notices from Director Mondero, Rotondo, Ross, and Sager, indicating that they cannot attend in person today. But pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, they are deemed admitted unless there's a motion against it. I don't see any. So hearing none, the directors may participate remotely. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes of the board meeting and executive session held on December 19th of last year, 2004. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes which you've all been sent? Seeing none, how about a motion and a second? Motion by Director Lewis, seconded by Director Yonan, that we approve the minutes of the board meeting of December of 2024. And with that, Madam Secretary, take the roll, please.
Dr. Carey. Aye. Dr. Colson.
Aye.
Dr. Gathing.
Aye.
Dr. Gorman.
Aye.
Dr. Groven.
Aye.
Dr. Jenkins. Dr. Koterick.
Aye.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes.
Dr. Mondero.
Yes.
Dr. Pang. Dr. Rotondo. Dr. Ross.
Yes.
Dr. Ryan.
Yes.
Dr. Sager.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Yonan.
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
We have 14 ayes.
And our minutes are approved in item 3. Item 4 is the public comment section or segment of the meeting. Any comments received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. We have any written comments today?
We have no written comments.
All right, and is there anybody present today that wishes to speak? Seeing none, oh, there is, I'm sorry. Come on up. Identify yourself for the record if you would, and thank you for being here.
Very, very short today. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, directors. My name is Kevin Brubaker. I'm the Deputy Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And I'm here to speak briefly in support of item 7A on your agenda, the resolution directing next steps toward addressing the fiscal cliff. As we all know, transit in Chicagoland is headed toward a fiscal cliff. Unless something is done, devastating service cuts will contribute to a downward spiral of public transit, endless gridlock, and worse air pollution. Alternatively, bold action can lead to a renaissance for public transit in Chicagoland with sustainable transit, a flourishing economy, and connected communities. But we can't chart this path blindly. We need data and expert analysis to understand the choices ahead for lawmakers, for transit planners, and for the public as well. As we all know, federal COVID relief funds will soon run out, with service boards facing an annual projected revenue shortfall of about 20%. You have anticipated this could translate into a 40% cut in transit service, but the public has no idea what that might actually look like on the ground. How long will suburban residents have to wait for their PACE bus? Will Metro run trains every 2 or 3 hours? Will CTA have to eliminate whole bus routes, thereby cutting off entire neighborhoods from service? Will we be able to afford to run trains on the newly constructed Red Line extension? Without some sense of the daily impact, it's hard for people to wrap their heads around what all this means. Simply put, we can't manage what we don't measure. Conversely, what do the alternatives look like? If lawmakers can indeed develop $1.5 billion in new funding annually for the transit system, as we and you and others agree is needed, what is the vision for improving service? Which buses and which trains will improve and how? The report you released yesterday provides the beginnings of that, but we need more detail. The stakes are high. Transportation is now literally driving the climate crisis, and we must act to reduce its impacts. Northern Illinois cannot meet its climate goals without a robust transit system, but we need clear data to get us there. I therefore respectfully urge passage of the proposed resolution listed at 7A on your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, 7A will give us greater detail than that which has already been laid out in my presentation yesterday to the City Club and publicly throughout the last several months. And then last but not least, I tell everybody that listens, if you care about the environment, the thing you can do to make the most impact immediately is to take public transportation, because public transportation, mass transportation, of the transportation, which is a major part of greenhouse gas emissions, almost all of it is automobiles, and only 3-4% of the pollution that comes from transportation comes from mass transit, even though, and this is in the metropolitan Chicago area, even though we're still moving 1.2 million riders a day. So if you care about greenhouse gas emissions in the environment, the single most important immediate step you can make is to take public transportation. So thank you. Your comments are
Couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Really well taken. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. All right. Item 5 is the Executive Director's Report. Leanne, good morning.
Good morning. So it's been a busy week. I think most people have realized that, but I do want to just go through a few acknowledgements and announcements before I get into some of the meat of the discussions today. As I think everyone is aware, CTA's President Dorval Carter announced his retirement on Monday this week after serving 10 years as president of CTA. Chairman Dillard released a statement that's on all our socials, so you can see a much more detailed summary if you wanted to about Chairman Carter, President Carter's service. And I just want to reiterate sort of my personal thanks and gratitude for him and the support and the commitment and the passion that he has provided both to the transit industry, but even to me, and especially in my dealings at the national level as well. I mean, he has provided a lot of support and insights, and so he has been really a true asset, a true transit professional for us in our region, and we wish him well in his new endeavors at St. Anthony Hospital. At their board meeting, CTA's board meeting just yesterday, they named Nora Learson as their acting president, and we will keep you informed as their search for a permanent replacement continues. Also retiring this month was Illinois Department of Transportation Secretary Omar Osman. Announced he is retiring after being at IDOT for 35 years. We're very grateful to Secretary Osman's leadership and his partnership with the transit agencies over the years. He's just a lovely man to work with, and I think his energy and enthusiasm has been well received in the region, and we wish him well. The former Chicago Department of Transportation Commissioner, Gia Biaggi, is taking on the role of IDOT Secretary going forward. I personally have a good relationship with Gia, as well as many of us on our staff, and we look forward to working with her when she in that new role. As many of you know, also, Chairman introduced a vision for transforming transit yesterday at City Club. You have a copy of that booklet at your desks, or your places, I should say. It's not desk, it's not school, in school mode. And we are going to dive into those details in a little bit more in a few moments. And if you want a recap of the speech and the local coverage, look at our regional transit update that we share, basically a digital newsletter that we will be sharing tomorrow, which will have a comprehensive collection of all of that information. In tomorrow's newsletter, you'll also get a link to register for the next Transit is the Answer Coalition meeting. That will be held virtually next week. Not next week, Tuesday, February 11. I should be wishing the weeks away that quickly. At this meeting, we'll be discussing the vision that the chairman laid out and shared yesterday, and really gathering feedback, as we're going to do a little in a few minutes with you guys as well, on both that vision and our legislative strategy as we look to the next, couple of critical months that we have to keep working on this with the legislature. And we hope that you can attend if you are available. And we will report back, though, at the February meeting about those discussions. Actually, attendance is kind of off the charts. It's just a couple of weeks away, and we already have over 178 people, I think, registered for it. So certainly interest, and hopefully that translates into support, and good feedback for us. A few other announcements I want to make. The Government Finance Officers Association, or the GFOA, once again awarded the Certificate of Achievement in Excellence for financial reporting to the RTA for its annual financial report for 2023. And this marks, yes, the 30th year that the RTA has achieved that prestigious award. And I want to congratulate our finance team for that achievement. I also want to let you know that we have just kicked off the 2025 Customer Satisfaction Survey. This is the bigger and more comprehensive survey that work we do about every 3 to 4 years, which supplements sort of ongoing and more regular work that we do in this space. That really allows us to tap thousands of riders on our region with sort of a strong collaboration with the service board. So it's not just RTA doing this, we do it in partnership with the service boards. And it is ultimately supplemented by a very comprehensive onboard surveying activity that starts to happen in March later this year. Results are expected to be published second half of this year, and it's really important information, not for just us and the service boards as we think about the services that we provide and how we are doing, but it's also very important in terms of Title VI analysis, which is the equity analysis that we have to do across our region with respect to service changes and fares. It could be, if we will talk, as we've been talking about, if we have to go down this service cut and fare increase conversation path, that kind of analysis is absolutely critical for us, and input is helpful for us. And we're prioritized its completion before any of those major changes or impacts to the system, could have to be considered, so that we'll be informed. It's another piece of data and information informing decisions that we and the service boards hopefully don't have to make. So next slide, please. Moving on to the legislative update, you're going to hear from Rob in a few minutes about the full state and local legislative update. So I'm going to just focus briefly on the federal side of things. December 21, President Biden signed the short-term funding bill, which funds government through March 14th. So we've got a continuing resolution to keep government running through that time. On Jan 10, the outgoing Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg announced the almost $5 billion in grants for over 560 projects funded funded from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Among those awards included just over $48 million for Metra for 2 station reconstruction and rehabilitation projects for Van Buren Street and Rogers Park. And then about $22 million for smart gate crossings to be installed across the Chicago South Side. Also on Jan 10, the CTA and the FTA, and Chairman Dillard already noted this, signed the full funding grant agreement for $1.97 billion in federal funding for the Red Line South extension. Which will create a 5-mile extension of that line to 130th Street on Chicago's far south side. Construction is slated to begin in 2025 and be completed by 2030. CTA held that signing ceremony on Friday, and the chairman spoke at that, and I know a couple of you were also in attendance. So next slide, please. On today's agenda, we have an update on the implementation of Transit is the Answer, and we're going to go over the transforming transit vision that the chairman laid out yesterday at City Club. I know a couple of you were there, but I think it's important that we share with all of you, and we're actually looking for some feedback and conversation on that as we kind of look to continue our state and local legislative strategy and our outreach across the region. There'll also be some updates, an update on the financials as well. Then we'll ask for a vote on the resolution introduced last month by Director Kotarek and discussed at our December meeting on the steps to address the fiscal cliff. We had some public comment on that, as you just heard. And 2 final items for action will include the appointment of a new pension trustee from PACE to our pension trustee board, and the approval of some travel expenses for the chairman. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it back to you, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for our executive director? Just a couple of, to add a couple of comments. On Dorval, on President Carter and Secretary Osmond's retirement, I'm going to send a letter, if it's okay with the board, just thanking them for their service, saying how much we enjoyed working with them, and wishing them well in their next endeavor. As John will tell you, it's nice to have a Secretary of Transportation coming from our region. She will clearly understand congestion and the kinds of activities that take place up here specifically because she's lived and breathed them when she worked for the city of Chicago. So she's a great choice. And the replacement, the temporary replacement for President Carter, great choice in Nora. She's a veteran of the CTA, and I don't think they'll miss a beat there. And she'll be a very, very good interim that's there. Thank you to those who came to City Club yesterday. They're happy with us because we sold it out. So, I thought it was an excellent discussion. Obviously, there are a lot of people that have an interest in mass transit, just by judging by the size of that crowd. I want to thank the media and Tina and myself and Leanne and Melissa have talked to a number of media outlets, with an embargo until the speech was given yesterday. But I want to thank those members of the media, including Bloomberg, who covered us and covered us very well. Really appreciate the interest by the media in what we do. And I can't thank the staff, and they're going to come up and talk about Transforming Transit, how hard the staff worked, as they always do on this, and how well they prepared me. They make us all look good every day, and I really thank Tina and Rob. I don't want to get into the specifics, but Kyle and Anthony and Jill, you all, work so well to make us look professional, and it's deeply, deeply, deeply appreciated. Malik, thank you. Rob Nash had to lug boxes around with these things in them to put on the tables yesterday. And Rob and I were out last night at the DuPage Mayors and Managers. So as Leanne said, long day. And I look forward to maybe getting a night off tonight. But we have a lot of work ahead of us. But I'm enthused, as I told that crowd, and it was a massive crowd at the House of Hope for the Red Line signing extension. I'm enthused more than ever to go to work on finding the solutions that we need to find to literally transform transit and to take us further into the 21st century and improve service for everyone. Just on one last note, and Director Lewis said it was almost the same on his. This morning I rode in on probably the fourth car of my train, so 7-something out of Hinsdale. 18 people in my car, the fourth car. I counted them and I took pictures, and Tina will put it up on Twitter later on. But standing room only, in the vestibules, in the stairwells, and then halfway back to my car in the aisle, people stood. So there's obviously a need for mass transit. And if we have to have 40% service cuts, the disaster that would mean would be unfathomable. Within our last month, since we approved our minutes of the meeting of December, another study came out and said that Chicago has the second worst traffic congestion of any city in the world. As it was presented in our presentation yesterday, just imagine if the CTA moves 50,000 people to the central business district in the morning, if just 10,000 of those, because of service cuts, decided that they wanted to drive to work, not only would we have gridlock, or it would be gridlock, it wouldn't be just creeping. I mean, it would be almost literal gridlock. So service cuts, we need to improve service, additional service. And then my big message yesterday was frequency is freedom. The more frequent service we have, where we can provide, if we get $1.5 billion of additional funding, the frequency is people's freedom to know that they can get on a bus or a train without a very long wait. And then another one will be coming in 15, 20, 25 minutes. So frequency is freedom is one of our themes from yesterday. And I'm enthused going forward. It's going to be a very, very interesting year. And then last but not least, at the DuPage Mayors and Managers last night, one of the things that Rob and I tried to stress, and the legislators were there from that region, is we need a solution by the end of May. Having been a legislator, we have had a tendency to wait till the last minute to procrastinate. But May is the critical point because we have federal requirements and hoops, as Nora will tell you, that we have to go through. We just can't suddenly make decisions. We have federal requirements that will require time to plan, and then we have our own budget planning process. But the federal government has requirements on us. Most of them, many of them, are civil rights types of standards we have to meet and talk to the federal government about if we were ever to make cuts. And hopefully we'll never have to come around to making cuts. But May is a critical deadline. And, I try to tell my former colleagues, you got to do it now because they hear 2026 is when the monies will finally run out. But really our deadline is the end of May. And it's going to be daunting because there are a lot of other groups out there that have pressures. But we have a 4-to-1 return on investment. and we move 1.2 million riders a day, many of whom are students. I'm not sure many folks understand that if you're a CTA student or you're lucky enough to go to St. Ignatius or a private school, or I rode the CTA to DePaul University, many of our riders are students. We don't have a yellow bus system in Chicago like they do in Effingham or Springfield. It's the CTA, that's your school bus. So, when we're all elbowing out where everybody is for funding, precious funding from Springfield, 1.2 million riders a day, and many of them are students and also people with disabilities through our ADA program. So I told the City Club yesterday in the question and answer period, I believe we are the state's #1 priority because we get people to work. And if you're an employer, that's how your employees get to work, and that's how your customers come into your stores as well. So we have our work cut out for us, and it'll be fun. And anybody is always welcome to join Rob or Anthony or Kyle and myself in Springfield. I went down to the inauguration and got to see probably half, and spoke to half the legislature at ad nauseum receptions last Wednesday and Thursday. And they seem to understand. One thing that's good about this round of needing money is that I don't think anybody disputes the value of transit. In the past, because I've been there, some would dispute the value of transit, but I don't think anybody is now disputing the value of transit. We're over that. They understand we're important, but it's just a lot of pressures from a lot of different interest groups who all have, very good needs for the money. But in terms of priority, I love the Chicago Bears and I love the Chicago White Sox, but our 1.2 million riders are a little more important than perhaps building a new stadium, although the legislature can deal with that. So that's kind of where I'm at. And again, I just want to thank the staff for your great preparation of us all. All right, with that, we're moving on. 7A, Director Koterek, thank you for working on this resolution. 7A is a resolution directing the next steps to address the fiscal cliff.
We have the transit is the.
We've got 6A first.
Oh, yeah, we do have 6A first, don't we? Transit is the
That's
answer
great.
update. Leanne will speak
Cool.
first with Rob Nash and Sarah.
Yeah, I'll be
Mino
on
and Sarah, coming up here. Just get so excited about delineating what the steps, the next steps are.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
We'll
This
get
is like,
there.
this is the appetizer for the reason why the resolution is important.
It's all yours.
All right. So, whether you were there or not yesterday, we did think it was important that we go through essentially the core pieces of what the chairman discussed yesterday. So I will walk you through that vision. Transforming transit is based on really years of engagement and work that we have been doing with advocates, the service boards, the public, and legislators. So it brings together really many ideas that we've already shared publicly around funding and reform. But it also does so much more specifically, gets more specificity and talks about the urgency of the previous public discussions. Our goal and hope is to build on this vision in the coming weeks and months and refining and adding really more detail to what that vision looks like. We heard that kind of comment coming from the public speaker, and I think it connects also to the resolution. This is really, as we said before, sort of the starting point of the conversation and sort of really that first sort of flag in the ground to keep building that information, those proposals, those details, and momentum more specifically. So that we can really deliver that the system that we've envisioned and really the one that we adopted in Transit is the Answer of a safe, reliable, accessible public transportation system that connects people and opportunity, advances equity, combats climate change, can really, really become a reality for this region. So next slide, please. Before I lay out the vision, it is always important that we remind people that what's at stake if we do fail to act in time, and if the General Assembly does not find a funding solution for our fiscal cliff by the end of May, It will leave a 20% budget gap in our regional budget beginning in 2026. And as you've all heard it, but for those maybe listening online or tuning in later, that results in a 40% cut in service across our region. So next slide. In the chairman's speech yesterday, he really made it clear the General Assembly has the power to choose one of two very different paths as we go forward. And the one is where we fail to find a solution, and we must begin for planning for service cuts this summer, then implement those cuts in January 26. And we foresee, related to that, a drop in ridership beginning immediately and continuing as service further degrades. The other path, the one in which we, the double-digit ridership growth and the plans for service improvement and expansion continue, and we double down on the investment to boost frequency and improve service across the system, giving us really the best chance to gain back that ridership, get back to that pre-COVID ridership levels by 2030, and really deliver on the system that the region wants and deserves. So next slide, please. Specifically, we believe that the $1.5 billion in annual funding would allow a strengthened RTA to oversee region-wide minimum service standards that cut customer wait times by as much as 50%. Our vision is of more frequent service across the system for all riders, regardless of whether they are in the city, the suburbs, whether they ride CTA, Metro, or PACE. So next slide. But we've said from the beginning that that we agree that any funding must come with reform. And while we've spoken about the areas of reform we believe are necessary to achieve the outcomes that riders have clearly expressed that they want, we felt it is important to lay out examples of how a more efficient and transparent, accountable, and a coordinated system really impacts riders directly. Previous to the chairman's speech, we spoke about these terms very generally. But with this vision, we want to make sure it is crystal clear that the RTA is proposing historic restructuring of the region's transit governance to maximize the impact of new funding and ensure that riders can access a reliable and integrated network across our region. Rather than distributing key responsibilities across agencies as it is today, the RTA's proposed reforms result in one agency, the RTA, being accountable to riders and legislators on the most critical, important system-wide issues. And they include fares, service quality, and capital investment. And so what would that look like for us? So let's jump to the next slide. And we've got a few visuals, and the more details are in the book as well that you have at your place. So if that's a little hard to look at, look in the booklet. But a strengthened RTA would set one regional fare policy and develop a universal fare payment app and rider hub for all fare and customer service issues, ensuring that riders have access to simple, easy to understand fares, integrated information at stations and at stops. So next slide. For example, in addition to getting automated and accurate arrival times for your train at a station, you could also get information about the nearest bus routes at that station, regardless of who operates them. A strengthened RTA would establish transit service standards that would allow everyone to better understand the frequency and scope of transits that would be available in their specific communities. 4 times a year, CTA, Metro, and PACE would be required to come before this board and report on the level of service that they're providing to ensure that it is meeting those standards and providing those levels of service that have been set. If an operator isn't meeting that level of service, the RTA board could require improvement before granting additional funds. If needed, the RTA could also use discretionary funds to contract for new routes or supplemental services to fill in those gaps in the network. And that's something we're precluded from doing right now. So this would mean, go on to the next slide, yeah, thanks. So this would mean that on-demand service could be used to fill in last mile or late night gaps, or provide vouchers to riders for on-demand ride service if scheduled service is either cancelled or disrupted. Next slide. A strengthened RTA would also evaluate all major capital projects and distribute funding based on scoring and level of need. Key metrics like accessibility, job access, and the climate impact would also be paramount in those evaluations. A strengthened RTA would lead planning for projects across operators that cross operators and geographic boundaries, which are often the most significant to the region as a whole. And really, this is where the lack of coordination and really the advocacy is required to win those scarce federal dollars. So thinking about these things from a regional and a broader perspective, not just from a specific potential operator perspective. So next slide, please. The chairman also addressed safety, as he has pretty much, I think, in every public statement or public presentation he has made about the system, about our future. Our desire to see the state fund and support additional police and social services on transit was added to our 2025 legislative agenda, as I think you are all aware. And we believe and we know that frequency and reliability of service really play a large role in making transit safer. One of the parts of the transit trip where riders often report feeling most unsafe is when they're waiting for a bus or a train. With frequent service everywhere, all riders will experience shorter and more predictable wait times and ultimately safer trips. Knowing this problem is one with, this is a big problem with no really just single solution. The chairman also pledged to continue to convene organizations and decision makers to work on this topic as we did a year ago in the Safety Summit. So next slide, please. Our vision includes a plan to make the system more efficient as well. And this ties directly to the resolution that we'll be considering in a couple of minutes. And the funding and reform described in our vision must come with the ability to track progress and enforcement mechanisms that we don't possess today, and allow us to institute changes and improvements when needed. This governance structure will result in cost savings for riders and taxpayers, and we estimate that placing key system-wide responsibilities with the RTA will save $50 million annually. Additionally, we believe that riders who use the system do have to make a contribution, and a reasonable 10% system-wide future increase to account for inflation, rising operations and costs generated, that would generate approximately $50 million in annual revenues to the region that could be included in the mix to the state and local funding as we look to solve our challenges. To ensure all riders in the region experiencing low incomes are not overly burdened by any fare increases, we are asking the legislature to fully fund and expand the Access program. The Access program, I think, as you know, is that reduced fare program that currently Metra is piloting across the entire region, and would look to expand that to both CTA and PACE. Combined, this increased efficiency and additional system-generated revenue will bring the agency and rider contribution to the fiscal cliff of $100 million annually. And these initiatives will help ensure that as much operating funding as possible goes to delivering more frequent service. To underscore this commitment, we are also proposing that any new operating funding beyond filling the budget gap is only to be used to improve and expand services and not fund administrative or management positions. So next slide, and to conclude, in his presentation yesterday, the chairman invited the audience to attend the upcoming coalition meeting that I also mentioned in my ED comments, February 11, and everyone to reach out to their legislative representatives and make sure their voice is heard in this conversation. As the legislative session continues, we will adapt this call to action to be as specific as possible in directing people to actions we believe will most support this vision. And before we move on to our local and state legislative update, I'm happy to just take any questions And I have some staff here and other staff are in the audience, but if you had any specific questions or comments on this vision, as we start this continued conversation, happy to take that now.
Dr. Gorman.
Where's that February 11th meeting?
We'll do it virtual. It's held virtually because we actually can gain more input and participation. There might be future in-person activities and events coming up, but it will be February 11 online. The newsletter will have the link to sign up. You do have to sign up so you can get the link for the meeting. We can also share it directly with the board as well.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Carey.
I have a couple comments and a question. First of all, I am really pleased to see the definitive level of information here and of the presentation. I think we have been moving towards this and perhaps a little more slowly than some of us would have liked. But I think it's time. When the MMA bill came out a year ago, many of us felt that wasn't the answer. So it's important that we put out what we think the answer is. And I feel we are so much closer to that today than we were, 6 months ago or 2 months ago. I want one other comment and then a question. I want to make sure, and you've heard this from me before, that in the 5.5 years I've been on this board, there's a certain level of frustration that the RTA is called the Regional Transit Authority, and we have regional responsibility as far as the budget, but there are many things we cannot influence as we should at a regional level. And so I think as we talk about supporting additional authority for the RTA, I think regional planning shouldn't be lost in that. And I know we talk about the capital prioritization, but it even goes a little bit above that. And there are some comments in here that relate to it. But any project, the Red Line extension, anything like the DuSable, the bus lanes on the Lakeshore Drive, those are things we should be well aware of. We should be involved in talking with state agencies, with the counties, with the city. We should be the representative voice for all the service boards on those. And I think we need to be at that macro level where we haven't always been there from the beginning. And then my last question is it time to take this language, some of the language in here, and draft it as legislation?
Rob, you want to answer that one?
I think that is our intention. Looking for initial feedback from the board. I think that is our hope and our plan to start crafting this into what could be legislative language to try to advance the conversation further forward as we keep talking about the timing, and the legislature is in session right now and starting to receive input on those kinds of things. And that's something that we are actively engaging in right now and will continue to try to advance that.
Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think with Director Carey, in the time I've been on the board, I know one of the challenges has been that the RTA has all the responsibility, but none of the authority. So my point would be, in these remarks, it really talked about the identification of areas where the RTA would have more unilateral ability to either stop or proceed with permission on certain areas and control the actions beneath them. I just want to make sure that point's not lost. That is to say, there really needs to be embodied in this an ability to actually manage, govern, and control. And I hope we don't lose that sense in the drafting or in the creation of the mother documents, because that has been a long frustration. We make recommendations, but there's no enforcement capability. There's no authority to actually take strong action and actually halt something if it doesn't make sense. So this is more of a comment than I thought the chairman's remarks yesterday were very well received. In fact, it surprised me how many people didn't know about the physical crisis that we're facing. And so I saw a lot of mouths open and go like, my God, I didn't know that. So I think we have to seize this opportunity where people are listening and looking to make sure that we incorporate some of the things that have long been a challenge for this authority and actually build in strong controls, strong elements that allow us to do our job and staff.
Chairman, Dr. Mondero had a question or comment.
Director Mondero, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Chairman Dillard. I also want to echo the comments that this, I think, is a really great leap forward in terms of creating a potential vision. My question for perhaps Leanne is, has there been consideration of other things that can be consolidated? And I'm thinking particularly about security. Um, when I read through the materials, it seems like, well, the RTA would have the ability to take monies away if someone's not doing something, but we wouldn't take monies away if one of the service boards isn't providing enough security. So what's the mechanism to really make sure that security is done, or unless there's already in conversations that I've just not been a part of, like a much more comprehensive analysis as to how we will really make sure that the system is safe for the general public.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of two parts to that. When we were talking about the potential allocation and or holding and or funding additional areas, we were talking specifically more about sort of service planning, service standard levels across the three different operators. In terms of safety and security, I think our hope is with the additional funding that those funds are allocated. And I think a lot of the foundation of these conversations as we get into potential legislative language is ensuring that the RTA is embedded in conversations on the front end. I know this board, we have talked a lot about, we get to the board gets to engage kind of at the end of a budget cycle, for example, and sort of how are we embedded into those conversations formally on the front end as well. So I think that that's a piece where the safety and security piece would come into. Additionally, I mean, the action item that we've got coming up on this agenda, which speaks to both the efficiencies and sort of future planning around sort of the positive side of improvements if the region chooses to invest versus, and the downside if they choose, if the path of not investing and sort of that downward doom and gloom death spiral occurs. That's something, there's going to be, as I said too, more information coming over the coming sort of weeks, months, because some of those levels of detail we are still working with the service boards. And I will say we have their attention, and we have a lot more information than we did even sort of a month or so ago. But we're continuing to work with them on refining that. And that's I think a key item that we'll talk about in that action item under the resolution.
Director Koterik.
First, a big thanks to the chairman and to the staff, Leanne and Rob and Malek and Jill and Tina. I think yesterday really was a step forward. I mean, that's clear. We're seeing definitive numbers about savings. We're seeing different ideas of how to change things in response to the General Assembly, the governor, and the public. Environmental Law and Policy Center had come to the RTA 2 years ago or so during the Transit is the Answer formation, had made some critical comments about that not going far enough. I think if we look back at that, we're at that point that they were asking the RTA to get to now, which is sort of really addressing these issues head on that have been sort of clear about what should be a regional authority and what should the RTA do. And to Director Carey's comment about, and Director Lewis, as well, we don't have the authority to do things. I think the next agenda item is really testing that. I think that there's been valid criticism that perhaps we've had the authority, haven't exercised it, or perhaps have exercised it and been ignored. And I think that this is, the next agenda item is really what we've talked about is the RTA convening and leading on important issues like this. Director Mondero brought up safety. I think there's a bunch of them. We talked about this when the service boards came. PACE is doing a bus redesign. It's great work, and it's called for because service, patterns need to change with the post-pandemic work, remote work, and more sort of weekend demand. I mean, it's clear that that has to happen. The CTA has not done a bus redesign in decades. They're doing one too. They both have the same consultant by chance. You know, that table to figure out where those routes should be the regional scale. PACE has a ton of service in the city of Chicago, and CTA has a ton of service outside of the city of Chicago. And if we're thinking about it, we should be using those assets efficiently and effectively and matching it to the service to maximize ridership. That table should be ours. There's no reason for us not to call for that and to ask for that. And I think that if you look at other issues like capital planning, safety was brought up, customer relations. This is something that's explicitly brought out in the chairman's remarks. Yesterday at the CTA board, there was a long discussion about contracts that the CTA is getting into. This is also a safety issue. If you're on Metro, look at the QR code and the text this number. It goes directly to a central location, people act to it. CTA riders don't have that same level of bringing a customer complaint. You have to hit a button on a train. It's very different. Why can't that be seamless? And why can't that level of service be for everyone? Why aren't we setting that table and asking that to happen here? I think those things don't have to wait for legislation. I don't think that they should. And I think that we should try. The other piece is that, you know, for those authorities that we feel we do not have or they're gray and that we put out yesterday, let's put that in draft. You know, let's put the legislation together. If we are going to tell the General Assembly they have to act by May, then let's put it on paper. You know, I mean, we're late to this, pretty late. You know, I mean, the Metropolitan Mobility Act was introduced well over a year ago, and I don't think we're going to be the only ones that have a proposal. And I think for us to be serious about this, we have to put that pen to paper and show what that looks like. And this is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable for everyone. We have a $771 million budget gap. It's the biggest in our history. The riders and the customers are going to be uncomfortable. We deserve, they deserve our full, serious effort and honesty in this. And I think that that honestly can't start soon enough. The last point I'll make is that I think that this exercise, the speech yesterday, and just the climate and the conversation is again, governance is an issue. It is an issue. This isn't a distraction. It's clear, obviously, that funding is the top priority, but governance is an issue. The governor has said it, the General Assembly has said it, the public has said it, and so I'm really happy that we're finally, admitting that out loud and giving our response, the RTA collectively responding to what that might look like. So again, a kudos for getting out there and being honest, and frankly, making folks, think about these things that we've wanted them to think about for a long time. So thanks.
Thank you, Director. Director Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Executive Director Redden, you and I kind of talked yesterday about, talking with labor and seeing where there's similarities and stuff like that. So kind of piggybacking off of what Director Katerik was saying, like, is there a plan of when legislation would be written, right? And like, do we know who else is going to be putting out legislation? Is there any thoughts on like coalition building and making sure that like, whatever RTA puts out there, there is support for it? Because, we're all going to have to come up with one set of legislation ultimately. So is there a way to like build coalition around it so that, 10 people aren't introducing different pieces that everybody has to sort through?
I mean, as you and I have talked, I think we do have stuff being drafted now, and that's been sort of in the works for a little while. I think we are absolutely open to partnerships and sort of finding commonalities amongst different groups that might have similar interests and sort of working in partnership or in collaboration with them. We have been trying to stay apprised of maybe other groups that maybe were and maybe still not now advancing legislation, things like that. So Rob, I don't know if you want to add anything more specific, because you're having a lot of conversation with a whole host of different
Yeah, and I can speak to it a little bit more in the report here too. But there are definitely going to be additional proposals put forth by different organizations. And, while I think we're going to work very strongly to develop those coalitions, particularly with labor, frankly, the RTA received positive feedback after the presentation on a number of fronts throughout the day yesterday, particularly from organized labor. and they're undoubtedly an important voice in this conversation. So we'll continue to work with them. The MMA Act was refiled, this week, with some small tweaks, and so that, remains a discussion point, I think, for certain. But to one point that you made, Director, I don't know if we can prevent others from putting forth ideas, but I do think we remain engaged in the process, particularly in the Senate, to kind of collect those various thoughts and filter through how we can come to consensus on that. I do think there will be other proposals put forth, maybe not comprehensive proposals, but individual thoughts on different specific items that they're going to be included in the conversation. For example, some people might have specific ideas on one or more of the buckets that we've identified. So people might put forth language on those, but maybe not an overall comprehensive bill. So we clearly understand, not just because of our structure, which is regional in nature, and the various appointing authorities, but there are a lot of advocates that have a seat at this table, and we need to bring as many of them together as possible. It's going to be complicated enough, but the more we can try to drive that consensus at the front end, I think will be helpful to, well, at least to my ulcers and sleep patterns as we get into May. So we want to gain as much ground on that front as we can before we have to really come to some hard decisions later in the session.
Yeah, and obviously we can't stop anybody from
Yeah.
putting it forward. It's just a matter of have you heard of anyone who is, or
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Clean Energy Jobs Coalition, which has weighed in on a number of these, and the environmental community sort of as a subset of that, there's a rider, advocate network that has also participated in some of these conversations. So we could see additional elements coming from them. To this point, I don't want to speak for those organizations, but to this point, they've sort of, I think, focused on the MMA. But again, as things evolve, I think there could be additional perspectives provided from the advocate community. Labor, we've already talked about. And frankly, there are built-in actors here that have yet to weigh in definitively, but we know, obviously, the governor is going to have a very major role to play, as the chairman outlined yesterday in his discussion. So I do understand, the urgency to act, but again, I think the starter pistol has been fired, and a lot of people are getting engaged in this conversation. I'll just note, at least as far as we have been informed at this point, that we do anticipate some hearings, at least in the Senate, to sort of set the table again, and then I do think a little bit more of that in-depth negotiation will start as we kind of get into that second quarter of the session, as you could call it.
Director Carey.
Do we have a time frame? Because if a lot of entities, as you're saying, are commenting on the MMA or coming up with their, I mean, I, as a RTA board member, would love to have our position out there and let them comment on that.
Our anticipation as soon as possible. There's various deadlines to submit proposals to the drafting bureau in Springfield, one of which is next Friday. So we'll be moving diligently to make sure we're in the mix. I think as far as we understand how the process will unfold, I think there's going to be a little bit of time between today and sort of the next substantive hearings in at least the Senate side of things. So I don't offer that as we have plenty of time. We have to move quickly and diligently. So we'll be making submissions in the next 2 weeks or so, and then, like I said, I think March you'll start to see a lot more activity on it.
Yeah, and I think the third reading deadline is sometime in the middle of April. So you'll see if they're going to show us what they're going to do.
As they say in Springfield, there's deadlines and then there's deadlines.
Right.
I anticipate this evolving past sort of the third reading deadlines and really getting into the final weeks of session.
Me too. Dr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I just, the advocate for reminding, and of course, Leanne, you've done a great job of working with the DOTs in the region. But that's the biggest thing that I want to continue to say, that sometimes gets missed here. But because of that outreach, because of, as Director Carey said, that there's a lot of work that goes on through CMAP that brings in the DOTs that really want to partner, on the transit side. Again, these roads, in many cases, don't even get either resurfaced or rebuilt. I'll give you an example. you could use some transit money to put in a bus pad at a certain street. And when I was at CDOT, we literally would use transit money to put that into a resurfacing of a block because I could build a concrete lane of traffic. And if I didn't have those funds, we didn't resurface the street. You know, so that partnership is there. The DOTs want to embrace this. The timing is really critical too. They could scratch, you know, transit back now, and the capital bill is right around the corner for them in a couple years. And I just feel like the timing is perfect, as you said, Director Carey, to take more of a leadership role. It's in place. We just want to continue to bring them in because they don't know how to sometimes insert themselves in this space.
Yeah, and I think, especially on the DOT side of things, I mean, obviously at the state level, already talking with Gia and the secretary, Gia Biaggia, and continuing those conversations. At the county level, obviously, we've had a lot of conversation sort of at the county executive kind of level, as well as conversation around the DOT space. And having actually specific conversation like, what are you thinking in terms of legislation? Are you thinking anything? What are you doing? And engaging in those conversations. We just sat down with DuPage, it was right before the holidays, and it was, you know, county board chair, but DOT staff in the convo as well. So you're exactly right. There's a lot of detail and nuance that we want to, and look, sadly, I've been around long enough. When we sort of did the last structuring reform back into what resulted in the 2008 legislation, you know, the counties were critical in a lot of that conversation, and a lot of the work was done at that sort of county and DOT level. And so I got that experience too, and then Rob was around with us doing that at the same time. So I think, but yes, and any help that you can provide us as we continue those conversations, I think we'll be looking to tap the board in on conversations where you have specific relationships, and can sort of provide additional support and voices in those conversations, because it is going to be sort of an all hands on deck. Anyone who's been through kind of these critical legislative changes, it's, you know, there's a lot of pre-work and there's a lot of the 11th hour work as well. And so it's, you know, we're trying to do what we can to keep you apprised, but then, you know, you might get a call at 5 o'clock and I need sort of you to make a phone call by the next morning kind of thing. Those kinds of things will happen as we kind of go through this session.
An engineer, John, grabbed me yesterday after the speech and said, you should look at, because I was making the call for more bus rapid transit lanes, since we have the least amount of bus rapid transit lanes in the United States of any major city, saying partner with the bicycle enthusiast. And you know, you can do some things there in terms of construction and planning, you know, with your friends in the, you know, in the bicycle community. So, you know, good point, as an engineer would figure out, like you did, hey, you can use the bus rapid transit things to improve the entire roadway, for not only automobiles, but also perhaps bus or bike riders.
If I could just offer one comment on Director Carey's comment about regional planning and Director Yona's comments, and your anecdote there. I've talked to lawmakers in an attempt to give them a sense of the scope, because a lot of times we do have this sort of authority versus responsibility discussion. And the BRT concept is a great example of that, and that we're going to have to work diligently in Springfield on this as well. You know, to put in a bus rapid transit line, you obviously have to deal with the municipal DOT, and you also have to deal with IDOT if it's a state route. And so you have oftentimes a situation where the road's owned by the state, the waiting area or the station area on a bus line's owned by the municipality, and then we're charged with putting that service on the street. Well, that's hard to do if the DOTs aren't at the table and willing to engage in that conversation. And so that definitely has to be part of the conversation, because a terrible outcome would be, you know, the RTA is responsible for getting 15 BRT routes on the street by 2030, and then not mandating anything occur at the DOT level or the municipal level. And so those are the types of conversations that we do have to remain engaged in.
And that becomes the details in the legislation. That example that Rob just laid out has happened over and over again. RTA's responsibility of doing X and Y, but then there's no either consequences or no way to sort of, no teeth to it, basically, is sort of the blunt line. And they can be carrots and they can be sticks. And that's the key. That's the nuance of the legislation and the details that really have to be worked out, because it's kind of easy to just write new responsibilities into something. It's harder to actually think about how you, one, execute and two, enforce.
Absolutely. Anything else?
No, we're gonna move on because Rob has a little bit more on the legislative
Yeah, I'll try-
agenda and, huh?
I'll try not to repeat too much.
So, yeah, jump around.
Yeah.
And then we've got the financial update that we need to do.
Next slide, please. And actually one more. Get to it here. Thank you. I just wanted to give you an update on sort of the activities that we're going to undertake in the wake of the announcement yesterday and in anticipation of drafting legislation. So in the coming weeks, our team is excited to bring the vision that Leanne just outlined for you and the chairman presented yesterday to state lawmakers and other elected officials and other stakeholders from across the state. To that end, we've widely distributed the Transforming Transit vision to local, regional, and state elected officials and other stakeholders. As I mentioned, we've already gotten some really great feedback from folks and expressions of cooperation and collaboration. As we just discussed, we'll be crafting the proposal into legislative language, and I've spoken to Senator Villalobos in particular just this week on that process. We'll continue to gather feedback and build support for sustainable funding and strategic reform agenda. So in addition to the ongoing meetings with state legislative leaders, our outreach will include a briefing later this month with the congressional delegation and presentations to mayors and county boards across the region. A few things to look forward to as we get into the 2025 legislative session. Our goal is obviously to continue to advocate for additional funding for transit and RTA's vision for the future of transit, as well as to educate legislators and staff on the fiscal cliff and transit funding. One quick point that I would just offer as a talking point for all of you as you're engaged in conversations, $1.5 billion is a scary number. And as we've all heard, the state has a lot of competing interests. But there is one nuance that I'd just like to stress, that we're not looking, while we, I think, deserve and gladly would accept more direct state funding, and that is going to be part of the conversation, we're not asking for a blank check from the state of Illinois, because we understand that the region is going to participate in funding the system. And sometimes I think that's lost on lawmakers, that we're, sort of trying to come in and grab all the general revenue fund available. We're also asking simply for authority to ask the region to support the system that they have access to. So that's our original legislative mandate, and we want to return to that. And so that's an important conversation point as we talk about funding in the scheme of the other, demands on the state budget. Other updates in the RTA region, there are 5 new lawmakers taking office, and we're working to secure briefings with each of them following November's elections. There's also been some significant staff turnover particularly in the House, and we'll be working with them to update them on the process and where we stand, and to sort of educate them on our funding process and our mandate, as I mentioned, that the General Assembly offered, back in 1974 and 83 when we were created. I did mention earlier, we do anticipate some other proposals being put forth, including from the labor community. MMA, the Metropolitan Mobility Act, was refiled, and we anticipate that conversation, those elements being part of the conversation as we work to a solution in Springfield. Finally, the session will run through Memorial Day weekend. The governor will deliver his fiscal year 26 budget and State of the State address in February 19th, and that will give us a picture of budget negotiations to come for the year. We are working to brief the governor and his staff, as I think Chairman Dillard has mentioned a few times, and we'll continue to update this board on those discussions. I'll be happy to answer any other questions before I hand off to Sarah for the finance report.
Any other questions for Rob?
Just a quick question. This may be either for you, Rob, or Leanne. I know that our issue really is with the state, but just wondering, in Washington, you mentioned Pete Buttigieg and the turnover there. Anything we anticipate from the federal level that might impact the things that we're planning to do with the change in administration?
And I think, as the board knows, the federal government traditionally does not fund transit operations, and largely this conversation is around our operations funding. And I mean, the last time they did that was obviously the COVID relief monies and they're running out. We, though, will continue to engage and work with both our congressional delegation as well as the new administration. We are talking with our DC team to sort of think about what that might look like. Brett Garson with our firm out there has developed and nurtured some strong relationships with some of the leadership on the incoming administration, and myself as well as the service boards will continue to work through with the APTA process and sort of that positioning. APTA has already been engaging with transition team meetings, et cetera, to sort of think about how we position public transit. So the conversation will be focused at the federal level mostly on continuing sort of support for capital investment, and very specifically, making sure that the monies that the current legislation, the IIJA, et cetera, that those funding levels are maintained through the course of that bill. And our hope is that that remains stable and predictable as we begin to look to the new federal reauthorization bill that would be needed. I think the year is towards the end of 2026. So all that work will happen. It's not going to materially impact. So this is much more of a local regional funding issue on the operations side. But there is some connection, and we are still not losing sight of opportunities and funding from the federal government as well.
Just one other thought is we're clearly, most of our congressional delegation from here was at the signing ceremony on Friday. And two key players will be Darren LaHood from Peoria, as well as some of the congressmen here said, I don't want to tell you how to do your business, but Representative Mike Bost, who's really from Southern Illinois, very reasonable gentleman. You, Kirk, have to talk to, some of the Republican members since it will be a Trump White House. And, we're prepared to educate and work with some of the downstate congressional delegation who are members of the president's party, so that they understand really what we face up here. And again, as I said, Tom was there. Our congressional delegation is world class. They're great. They work together very well, especially on transportation and infrastructure issues. So it's a new day. We'll see what the Trump administration is like. But Rob, you and I are going to have to, really get up to speed with Darren LaHood and Mike Bost, who will have probably more connections and workings with the Trump administration than perhaps some of the other delegations. So it's a new day, and we'll figure out how we communicate.
Can I suggest that we meet with Congressman Bost at the 17th Street Barbecue in Murfreesboro?
Yeah, absolutely. He was a former state legislator, he's a fireman by profession, and a very good guy. I believe he's going to be the chairman of the Veterans Committee. He's a Marine, and but reasonable. Both Darren, I know these guys personally very well. Darren and Mike Bost are very reasonable people who will, have a bigger vision than just their own congressional district. They're going to understand that the Chicagoland economy humming helps Murfreesboro and it helps Peoria. Any other questions of Rob before we turn it over to Sarah? Sarah, it's yours. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Directors. I'm Sarah Rubino. I'm a Principal Analyst here in the Budget and Treasury Division. Following last month's certification of our third quarter results, this will be a brief presentation on the Service Board results now through November. Next slide, please. First, let's look at the operating deficit performance. The favorable trend continued through November for each mainline service board, while ADA Paratransit has an unfavorable result as ridership has driven purchased transportation expense proportionately over budget. Of note is that the ADA shortfall has increased to about $17 million from the estimated $10 million communicated to you all last month. The exact amount of the additional funding that PACE requires will be determined during PACE's year-end close process over the next couple of months. There are sufficient funds to cover the expected shortfall in RTA's ADA Paratransit Reserve Fund, use of which will require board approval. Pace Suburban Service continues to experience very favorable results versus budget. Despite extensive recruiting efforts, Pace's headcount remains about 250 FTEs, or 14% below budgeted levels. This in turn has led to lower than budgeted labor expense, while fuel, insurance, and other expense categories have also been favorable. Suburban service ridership has exceeded expectations, producing favorable system-generated revenue, which also contributes to their favorable operating deficit. At the regional level, the operating deficit finished November at 7.3%, or about $192 million favorable to budget. Next slide, please. Since our last update, the service boards have requisitioned an additional $63 million of COVID relief funding, and through the November results, our region had drawn down 71% of the $3.5 billion total. In December, CTA and Metra both drew down the full remaining balance of the relief funding, as PACE had done previously. This will be held in reserves for supporting their operating budget results. This action does not change the exhaustion date of the relief funding, still expected to begin in early 2026. And that concludes my presentation. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions there? Just, noting the continued pressures on ADA. One of the things that was in my presentation yesterday, and we reiterated to the DuPage mayors and managers last night, is the pressures on ADA paratransit continue to grow, especially as our population ages. It's well over a $400 million program. The state of Illinois contributes to this mandate of nearly $500 million, a measly $9 million a year. And it has got to be one of our major priorities to tell the state, you got to fully fund ADA paratransit. We get $9 million for something that cost us between $400 million and $500 million a year. And the pressure is growing on ADA paratransit. And it is not a program that we can scale back. There are, requirements, including court orders that require us to, as we should, provide this transportation to people with disabilities. So that's just a gaping hole that's there. And Rob, I sent Leanne a note last night during that DuPage Mayors and Managers dinner. One other real bugaboo that I have with the state is they charge us now to collect sales taxes, which is our lifeblood up here. And, that's the Illinois Department of Revenue's job. They do it anyway, but now they charge us to collect our sales tax. So, it's not as big a gaping hole as the unfunded paratransit, mandate that we have. But it makes me crazy that they charge us, and it's millions.
30 million.
30 million. $30 million, out of the blue, they came up with this, and we were with mayors and managers who have the same frustrations last night. But it's $30 million that out of the blue a couple of years ago, they said, we're going to charge you to collect a duty of the state that we already do. So it was just, it's like the rake at a black or at a roulette table. They just took 30 million of our money, and every time they do that kind of stuff, it makes the fiscal cliff deeper.
Yeah, it's on our list of 11 ways to solve or fill the funding gap. Just to clarify, on the ADA piece, the 400 million is actually the combination of ADA and the reduced and free ride program. So it's the combination of those three programs, which the state and the federal government collectively mandate upon us. So, that's that, but the numbers in terms of the shortfall and how little we get from the state is accurate.
Okay, yeah, Director.
I have a couple questions, but not looking for an answer today. One is on labor, and if we're gonna want to increase service, which we do, but we know that we have struggled with labor shortages, I just want to make sure that that's included in thinking about how we're going to do that. Like, even if we have the funds, but we can't find the bodies, then we won't be able to increase service.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I think the three service boards are essentially back to largely fully staffed, if you will. But yeah, it continues to be something that they need to think about. That's where I think the ongoing conversation too in the labor space, I think, is important as we're thinking about reform, not just thinking about the ways we can advance the agenda, but the practical implications of some of these things. So I think that their point's well taken.
Okay. The second is, I think in a previous conversation, we talked about what our peers are doing. In New York had proposed the congestion pricing. Now that they've implemented, could you maybe update us in a later presentation on the effect? Is it positive? And how does that affect their transit funding?
We can absolutely give you an update on that. And actually, I think, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got an upcoming blog post too that's from SEPTA in Philadelphia too on some of their fiscal cliff and planning and their challenges too. So we are trying to keep you informed. So we can include that as well as an update on the congestion pricing. It is one of the 11 on our list as well. It's a big policy change for our region if something like that was to be considered. But I can just give you this quick snapshot. I mean, while there's been sort of some grumbling and griping, it is actually having a positive effect. And, so I think it's a good opportunity for somewhere else in the US, because this is really the first foray beyond sort of some of the toll management, peak hour tolling that like California and Virginia and a few other areas in Florida have done. But this is sort of that first type of thing that, and it, probably not directly applicable, but I think that we would welcome giving you guys an update on sort of how that is playing out in the coming months.
And Director, just, you mentioned New York. They get 28% of their funding, operation funding from the state. The governor there put another $1.2 billion from Albany into the system. And on the safety side, and I'm not espousing this for Chicago, she assigned the National Guard to the subway. So, when I look, and I think Philadelphia, maybe at 50% funding from the state. So we're last at 17%. So the state of Illinois provides the least amount of operating support of any major state in this country. But New York is, doing a number of things. And on congestion pricing, boy, that first week, it sure reduced traffic from 60th Street southward in New York City. So, there was an effect right off the bat on traffic. So we'll get a report on that, and we'll watch it very carefully. And we'll see what happens to congestion pricing in New York in the future. Director Groen.
Thank you. Maybe more of a comment than a question. But we looked at the variances to budget, and before ADA, we're over 200 million positive. I know we don't want to, there's things in there like the fuel, budget, which is going to go with the economy. And some of those are labor holes that we want to fill, but feels like that's very fertile ground when we're having conversations with the service boards looking for efficiencies. What of that 200 million can we make sustainable? So I guess, again, more of a comment than a question, but feels like we're seeing some things in the numbers here that we could potentially act on.
Hopefully in the next, when we go to this resolution, hopefully some of the service boards will give us some of those as their efficiencies, because we're going to tell them we need efficiencies. And when I see the governor, he always asks, where's your efficiencies? So we put out 100 million yesterday, but the governor is big on looking for efficiencies if we
Segue to
want
the
help.
next item.
Actually,
Right.
Dr. Sagar.
Perfect segue.
Dr. Sagar has his.
Dr.
hand raised.
Sagar
Oh.
from out in McHenry.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Are we actually on 7A? That's my question, because I'm trying to do double
We're going to
duty.
go to it right now, Doctor.
Okay, so are you willing to entertain a comment on that
Sure.
item?
We're going to move on to.
Well, I think, Malik, were you
Oh,
going to give a
Malik.
quick overview of the draft resolution
Yeah.
before you? And then I would suggest we do that first. And then
Brian,
we
Doctor,
move to
let Malik and Allison walk us through with Director Koterick the introduction to 7A, and then I'll come right back to you, Doctor.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chairman and Directors. Maulik Vaishnav, I'm the Senior Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming. I'm joined by Allison Nobeck, our General Counsel, and I'll quickly provide a summary and answer any questions regarding the resolution to direct next steps in solving the transit fiscal cliff. This resolution in summary will direct RTA staff and the service boards to work together and bring back to you at the March RTA board meeting additional details in 3 key areas that can advance the conversation in Springfield towards more funding and reform. The impact of the fiscal cliff if a funding solution is not reached in time, including more information than we have already provided so far on potential service cuts. Conversely, the impact of a transformational new $1.5 billion investment in transit annually, some of which you heard in Chairman's remarks at City Club. And finally, a list of efficiencies and new system-generated revenues from a fare increase that total to about $100 million contribution to help solve the fiscal cliff. In order to facilitate this, the resolution asks the service boards to provide relevant data or reports to the RTA staff in 30 days after adoption, and we will return to you at the March board meeting with a full update on these 3 key areas. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Malik. Allison, you want to say anything, or thank you for working with Director Kotarek and everyone to put this into language. Dr. Sagar, it's yours now.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I hope everyone can hear me all right.
Perfectly.
Great, thank you. I want to express sincere appreciation to our colleague, Tom. He's done an exceptional job, I think, of forwarding this to our agenda and to the floor. I thank certainly all of our staff who have perfected the resolution that is before us. I think that this is an essential action on behalf of the RTA board to make sure that we are at the forefront of answering primary questions which exist by members of the legislature and the governor, and that is our efficiencies. And we need to be forward thinking in terms of how we can address certainly the financial need which exists, but also how we can improve the efficiencies so that we ensure that we are making best use of the resources which are available to us. And so in my mind, this is an essential first step, if you will, in terms of the legislative sessions which are coming forward now to really delve into the need for a solid, well-developed, well-supported transit system within the state of Illinois. I do believe also, in conversation with some other board members, that it is important that we have a follow-up resolution that will come after a bit of time as we proceed through this discussion with the legislature in this spring session. A follow-up resolution would be more in line with what is occurring a lot right now among all of the various county COGs or councils of government within the larger region. And that has to do with the specificity of governance regarding the membership on the RTA board, maintenance of the service boards, and certainly maintaining the supermajority requirement within the RTA. Most importantly, providing RTA with greater authority over major issues of financing, priority of capital projects, and the various reports, whether they're 2-year, 5-year planning reports, et cetera. But I do believe that we need to focus at this time in addressing the needs and the interests of the legislature and the governor, and that has to do with the efficiencies. And we are working to get the service agencies to help work with us directly to provide a very succinct summary of efficiencies that we are willing to address. That needs to be followed up, and I hope that there will be a commitment to follow up with a second resolution as we continue to move forward in concert with the state legislature this spring session. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Doctor, very much. Any questions? Director Jenkins, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to know, can you, Malik, confirm whether the service boards have, and I presume they do, know that this might be coming down the pipe? Have they started a strategy, or has there been conversations about the feasibility of getting us this information by the March 27th deadline?
Yeah, a couple of things. Yes, the short answer is yes, but just to give a bit more explanation on that, I mean, immediately after, obviously, the service boards actually have staff that either attend or listen into our board meetings, so they're all well apprised. I personally even did follow up, as well as at the sort of senior staff level at our counterparts with the service boards immediately after the board meeting, so before even the holidays happened. And as I think we've talked to you before about, even the fact that the chairman could kind of even outline some of these broad categories in terms of efficiencies yesterday, was the result of them starting to actually give us that kind of information. I think, as we've talked about in sort of some separate conversations with you, some of the elements are going to continue to evolve and get more specific over time. But we have certainly continued that conversation with them in terms of, you know, we may, you know, for example, on the service cuts and fare increase conversation, there's a very federally sort of prescribed, very prescriptive kind of process that they have to go to. Now, we probably won't get all of that done kind of thing before a May legislative deadline, but we need to have something more than what we've got now, and as it's continued to evolve over time, so something more over these coming weeks and months before, as we even sort of approach that level of specificity. And so we're having that ongoing conversation with them. I can tell you that I've had that conversation with sort of my counterparts, including the newly appointed interim president of the CTA. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago specifically. So it's not a new thing. I do think there will be, like I said, in a couple of the areas, there will be still a bit of an evolution on some of that, but I can certainly tell you they're aware and they know about this, and they I have been committing to working on this, and I hope that commitment continues.
And Director Jenkins, I saw Chairman Barkley Friday, and just reiterated, you know, he needs to make sure his staff follows through on efficiencies. It's not just the RTA that wants it, it's Springfield in general that want this, and so it's more than just us. Director Katarik, thank you very much to Tom for all your thought process and work on this.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say thanks to you and many of the other board members who, as the rookie here, you know, working through this and bringing this to the board, for your counsel, you know, particularly privately, about how to bring this to everybody's attention and get action on it. I think it, you know, we all agree it's very important, and I think it's really a threshold moment for us to get into some, you know, serious coordination that everyone says that we should be doing. I'll just highlight one other piece, is that in addition to efficiencies, there's also an opportunity here to find places that we can generate revenue ourselves. Heard a lot about, you know, underutilized land throughout the entire region that are near transit hubs. There's a decent inventory for the city of Chicago, but when we look at regionally, you know, where are those best used for something else than right now might be vacant, or for something that isn't generating revenue. And the last piece is, you know, I think Director Mondero had brought this up in the last time we discussed this, making sure you have the capacity to do this exercise. You know, this is something that the MTA had done back in November of 23, which was instrumental to their pitch to Albany, and other transit agencies as well, you know, Boston, Philly, others. You know, learn from others for sure, and look out and see what we can learn from them. But if you can't find the in-house capacity amongst the service boards and yourselves, I wouldn't be shy to come back here to talk to us about, you know, what support you can get to do this, because I think, again, this is essential. I mean, we've heard it clear, we've heard it in public, you know, Sunday Tribune last week, it's everywhere. We've got to come with the efficiencies in play before the General Assembly and the governor are going to take us seriously.
And just to speak specifically to some of the comments Director Katarik just made, the board might recall a couple of months back, we actually briefed you on our plans specifically on the land use side of things to actually engage in work both with the region as well as the service boards on sort of that land use analysis and opportunities. We know they've got bits and pieces of work, and how do we compile that into sort of a more comprehensive look. So there's sort of some first steps in some of doing that. Obviously, the legislative piece becomes an important key component of this to advance it further going forward. And I mentioned earlier in my comments too, we're learning from our peers. And I mentioned Philadelphia, and we've got an upcoming blog post that is going to that actually is one of those examples of speaking to what they're doing there. So we are well connected, I guess, in with our peers around the country. We actually have a meeting on Friday with the big legacy group around the country. And that's kind of convening. We'll be talking obviously about the new administration at the national level, but we talk and regularly. So, you know, we're ahead on some things and doing some things differently, but we continue those conversations to kind of work together and partner and learn from each other as well.
Great, thank you. You're far from a rookie, Tom. Any other questions on this? All right, so we need a motion and a second. Director Groven moves, seconded by Director Cook.
Director Sagar.
Oh, Director Sagar. You want to?
Oh, I would love to second. Thank you.
You are welcome and thank you. So our second comes from Dr. Sagar. With that, you want to call the roll, Joey, on 7A?
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson? Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Aye. Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katarik?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Tondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Aye.
Director Sagar?
Yes.
Director Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
15 ayes.
Thank you. And 7A is approved. Thank you. 7B is the appointment of an RTA pension trustee. I'm not sure we need a presentation, but if anybody does have questions, Allison's at the table and Bill Ackman is here. Any questions on the new pension trustee? You have the materials in your packet. Director Jenkins, you want to move that we approve this pension trustee? And how about a second? Second by Director Michael Lewis. And with that, Joey, you want to call the roll?
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson? Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Aye. Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katarik?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Rotondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Aye.
Director Sagar?
Yes.
Director Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
15 ayes.
And he is approved. The last item of business is 7C, and that's the approval of travel expense reimbursements. Any comments or questions on these? If not, how about a motion and a second? Motion by Director Carey, seconded by Director Gorman, that we approve 7C. And with that, Madam Secretary, take the roll.
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson? Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Aye. Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katarik?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Rotondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Sagar?
Yes.
Director Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
15 ayes.
Thank you. And 7C is approved. So we'll get you out of here a lot earlier than the last couple of meetings. Any new business to come before the board today? Seeing none, how about a motion and a second to adjourn? Director Gathing moves, we get out of here, seconded by Director Ryan. And with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And we are adjourned. Thank you.